Hello and welcome to my full stack web development crash course. So in this crash course, together we will build this fun, simple, but full stack web application in just a weekend. At least if you have nothing else planned. Of course, you can also take a few more days, but the point is that you can learn the fundamentals of web development quite fast by building this project over the next 12 hours. But anyway, let me now give you a quick tour of the Today I Learned app that we are going to build together. So the goal of this application is basically to allow our users to learn new facts that they didn't know about before. And so the main part of the application is this list of facts here that have been created by the users of this application. So each of these facts in the list has of course the fact text itself, and then users also need to input a valid source. You can also see that each fact belongs to one of the 8 categories that we have here in this sidebar. And once we click on one of these categories, let's say entertainment, then the app will only display the facts that belong to that category. So basically we are filtering the list of facts by the category. So here we have technology, and then of course we can also go back to all of them. Another feature of the application is that we can vote on facts. So we can let other people know that a fact is interesting by clicking here. We can let them know that the fact is even mind-blowing, or we can also let other users know that a fact is false. So then we can click here. So down here we have a false fact, which says that React was developed by Google, where actually it was developed by Facebook. And so it has a lot of these downvotes here basically, and so then therefore our application marks the fact as disputed. So basically to allow users to know that a fact might not be true. Finally, in order to add a new fact, we just need to click here on this button, and then here we can share a fact with the world. For example, we can say Udemy is the biggest course platform in the world. Then here we can see that actually the amount of characters is limited, and as we type here, this number updates. So a bit like on Twitter. Then here we need to provide a trustworthy source. So we can just paste the Udemy link here, and then of course we need to choose the category. So let's say technology in this case, then post, and there is our new fact. Now what's really cool about this is that all this data is actually real data. So it comes from a real database that is hosted on a web server. So when we reload this page, then you see that the fact is still there. It's down here now because the facts are ordered by the upvotes, but still the fact is here in the list because it was saved into a real database. And that's actually it. So it looks like a very simple app, but there's actually more going on here than it appears on the surface. So I really hope that you like this small application that we're going to build, and that you also enjoy this playful design that I created here. Now, if you have never written a line of code in your life before, you have come to the right place. Because we will start slowly and go step by step, and then speed up the pace as we progress through the course. And so here is how we're going to build this project together. First, we will set up your code editor and your coding environment using the best free code editor in the world. Then, before we start writing code, I will guide you through the basics of how the web and web development work. After that, we will slowly start building our project by first writing the HTML code for the page content. Then, once we have our HTML in place, we're going to style the page and give it a layout using the CSS language. Next, we're going to create an online database and an API for the data that we need in our application. So the facts that we just saw in the demo. And we're going to do that using a free service, this time called Supabase. Now, in order to load that data into the application and make the app interactive as well, we learn the fundamentals of JavaScript. And here the application will start to really come to life, which is going to be an amazing experience. However, writing apps with pure JavaScript can be difficult and time-consuming, and so we will build the final application using a JavaScript library called React, which is the most popular library to build web apps in the web industry. And finally, to finish, we will deploy the final project to a web server using another free service, which is going to be Netlify. So with this, your application will get its own URL on the internet that you will be able to share with all your friends to show them what you have accomplished in this short time. And now, before we actually start, let's see what you will and what you will not accomplish with this course, just to correctly set expectations. So, this is not a complete web development course from A to Z, and that's on purpose. Because these so-called complete courses promise to make you a web developer in just a few months, but that is completely impossible because they still lack a lot of detail. And so I wanted to try something completely different here, a different approach. So the idea of this course is that you can dip your toes into the world of HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and React just enough so that you can figure out if web development is actually a good career choice for you. So all without wasting months before finding out. And if web development is a good choice for you, then you can go ahead and learn each of these technologies one by one and in great depth. So taking this short crash course will not make you a web developer, but so won't most of these other mega courses. Also, you will definitely not master HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, but you will get some important fundamental knowledge and also have some fun with them. And even more importantly, you will know on a high level what technologies are used in the industry to build real-world web applications. So, don't expect to build complex web apps after just taking this course. But again, that's actually true for most courses. So just see this crash course as a fun experiment to play around with real-world web technologies, to expand your horizon a bit, and also to understand if you want to start a lucrative career as a web developer. And with that being said, it's time to actually get started. Just make sure that you read the very important next lecture, as it contains important information about starter files, how to get help, and how to take this course. And now, let's go have some fun! Welcome to the first actual lecture of this course. Now, there is a very good chance that this course is your very first contact with any web development and any programming in general. And so, before we actually start building our project, I think it might be a good idea to begin this course with a very high-level overview of the field of web development. So we're going to talk about things like the browser and the server, requests and responses, front-end and back-end web development, and of course about the core languages of the web. So buckle up and let's get started. So here's what we're going to do in this video. We're going to see what happens when we open up a web page in a browser, and based on that, I will briefly explain how the web works and how web development fits into the picture. So let's say that we're trying to access a web page in our browser at udemy.com. Now what happens as we access this page is that our browser will send a request to the server where this page is hosted on the internet. So each and every website is stored on something called a server, which is basically a computer that is connected to the internet and that is able to receive requests like this one. So again, when we browse to a certain website, our browser will send a request to the server where the website is stored, so where it is hosted. Then, when the server receives the request, it will take all the files that make up the website and send them back to the browser. And so we say that the server sends a response to the browser, which essentially contains all of these files that the website is made of. Now, as you can see from these file extensions, we have some HTML, CSS, and also JavaScript code here. And these are precisely the three languages that browsers can understand. So what this means is that all of the code that makes up a website needs to always be written in the languages HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Because, again, These are essentially the three core technologies that any browser can understand. But what do I actually mean by understand? Well, it means that once the browser receives these HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files from the server's response, it will take the code and render the website based on that code. So browsers are able to produce a visual output based on the code that we write as developers, which is pretty cool. And with this, you already have a good understanding of what happens when we browse to a website and also about the technologies that we use to build websites. Now, this visual output that we can see in the browser, so the final rendered website, is what we call the front end of a website. Therefore, the process of writing HTML, CSS, and JavaScript code is a process that we call front-end web development. So whenever you hear someone talking about front-end development, what they mean is developers writing the code that is displayed in the browser, so which is basically the front end of the website. And in fact, this is mostly what we're going to learn in this course, at least the very fundamentals of it. Okay. Now, as you can imagine, if there is a website front end, then there is also a back end. And the back end is basically the invisible part of a website. So the part that users will actually never see. Usually, a website's back end contains an application that is running on the server, along with a database that contains all the data that is necessary to power the website or the web application. Now, not all websites require a backend, but as soon as they need some data in order to work, some kind of backend will be necessary. Take the example of udemy.com that we're analyzing here. It's a very complex site that is always changing, so there are lots of things that always need to be done. New courses and reviews need to be added to a database, ratings and course length need to be calculated and updated, and so on. So, again, in order to take care of all this, there is some huge backend application running on Udemy's server that is capable of getting and adding data to a database, processing that data, creating files, and also of sending things to users' browsers. And I'm saying things here because web servers can not only send HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files, as we learned initially, but also just raw data. So, in other words, a browser can also just request some raw data, and the server will then get the data from the database and send it as a response to the user's browser. And I know this probably all sounds super confusing and complicated, but don't worry. You don't need to understand all this 100% in order to take this crash course. Again, this is just to give you an overview of how things work in the world of web development. But anyway, to do all these things on the backend, front-end technologies like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript are simply not enough. They are not able to do advanced stuff like connecting to a database, at least not HTML and CSS. So, in order to write backend applications, developers use some backend language like Node.js, PHP, Python, or even some other tool. There are many available. And the process of writing backend applications using one of these tools is called, as you can imagine, backend development. Now, in the real world, most applications require both a front end and a backend. And in that case, we say that the application is a full stack application. And actually, the name of this course says exactly that we're going to build a full stack app, which means that we're going to work a bit on backend development as well. But rest assured that it's going to be extremely simple. All right, and now just to finish, let's take a closer look at the three languages of the front end. So HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, as they are particularly important. So starting with HTML, we use HTML to write the actual content of the page. So that's the text, the images, the buttons, and all the content that you can see on a web page. So all that content is always written in HTML. Then we have CSS, which is responsible for the presentation of that content. So basically for styling and for laying out the elements on a web page in a logical way. And finally, we have JavaScript, which is the actual programming language of the front end. So it's the only programming language that browsers can actually understand. So JavaScript allows us to add dynamic and interactive effects to web pages. So we can use it to respond to user events, to manipulate the content or the CSS, to load data from web servers, and even to build entire front-end web applications. And actually, this is exactly what we're going to do in this course. So we're going to use all these 3 core web technologies, plus some other tools, in order to build the web application that I showed you in the course introduction. Okay, and with that, we finish this intro to web development and are now ready to start working on our amazing course project. So let's move on now. So remember those HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files that we talked about in the previous lecture? Well, in order to write these files, we need to install a special tool called a code editor. Now, actually, we could write code using any text writing program. So actually, even Microsoft Word would work, but it's best to actually have a specialized software that has features that make writing code a lot easier. And so let's now install the best code editor in the world for web development. So fire up your browser and then let's Google for VS Code, which stands for Visual Studio Code. So open up this first link here. And so this is, again, the best code editor in the world for web development. So it's the code editor that most developers use. And so this is the one that you should be using as well. And it is completely free. And so it's really a no-brainer. So right now you can just pause this video, download VS Code onto your computer, and then install it as well. So you can install VS Code just like any other application. And then once you're done, let's meet back here. All right, so if you installed VS Code onto your computer and open it up for the first time, it should look something like this. Only the colors will be a bit different, but we will take care of that in a minute. So I want to do 3 things now here. First, we want to install a couple of extensions. Then we want to set some settings. And finally, we also want to change the color theme. So starting with extensions, extensions in VS Code are basically just like extensions in Google Chrome. So where you can customize your code editor a little bit. So let's click here in this sidebar on extensions. And now we are going to install 4 extensions. So let's start with Prettier, which is probably the most important, and then select this first one right here. So you see it's used by 27 million developers. So this is one of the most popular VS Code extensions out there. So what this will do is that it will automatically format your code once you save it. And so with this, your code will always look exactly the same as mine, which will make it a lot easier for you to spot any mistakes that you might have done in writing your code. So I already have it installed. That's why for me it says disable here, but you can just click on install here and then you might have to reload VS Code. Okay, then once you're done installing this extension, let's go to the next one, which is called Live Server. And then it is this first one here. So this one with 28 million downloads. So again, another really important one. So click here as well to install it. And this one will basically create a fake web server on our computer so that we can very easily run the application code that we are writing. And the browser will then automatically reload as we save our changes. So that's really an invaluable tool. So make sure to install this one as well. And now 2 minor ones. So these ones are not really necessary, but they are nice to have as well. The first one is auto rename tag. So that should be this one here. So install that as well. And then also color highlight, which makes it a little bit easier to work with colors once we start writing HTML and CSS. So again, click here to install, then maybe reload your VS Code window, and yeah, then you're good to go with the extensions. Great. So next up, let's tweak the settings of your VS Code a little bit. So come down here to this settings icon and then click here on settings. Okay, and now we will basically only change 3 settings right here. And the easiest way to do so is to search for the setting names up here. So the first one is the default formatter. Exactly. So it's this one here, which says default formatter. And so here you now need to select the Prettier extension that we just installed. So go through this list and then find Prettier in that list. So it needs to be this esbnp.prettier VS Code. So select that. And so now the Prettier extension that we just selected will be responsible for automatically formatting your code. Okay, so that's one of the things we need to do to make Prettier work. And we also need format on save. So make sure to toggle this one here. So to turn it on, basically. So this one is also important so that each time you save your code, it will then automatically be formatted. So very important once again, so that your code always looks the same way as the code that I'm writing in the video. And finally, let's also set autosave, which will automatically save your code as soon as you change the focus of the window. So select this option here, so on focus change. And so then whenever you leave VS Code, or even if you just go to another tab, it will automatically save the file that you were working on. And so like this, you never lose your edits. Okay, so we set these 3 settings. And again, that should be enough for this course. And now finally, if you're wondering why your colors in VS Code look a little bit different than mine, that's because I have installed something called a color theme. So you can customize VS Code with different colors, which is actually especially important for the code that we are going to write. So even the code will have different colors for different parts of the code. Now you can just use the color theme that is defined by default in VS Code, but you can also install the same one as I am using so that, again, your code looks just as mine in the video. So to install a color theme, we just search here in the extensions as well. And in this case, let's search for OneMonokai. So that is the theme that I'm currently using. All right, and so it will then make our code look like this. For example, here, the JavaScript code will then have different colors for different, basically, parts of the code. All right, so you can go ahead and install it. There should be some install button, and then you can click on Set Color Theme right here. Or you can also, after installing the extension, come down here and then choose Color Theme from here. And then you get greeted with this list of options, and you can also try these other ones, which all came pre-installed with VS Code. Okay, and with this, we are actually all set to start writing code in the next section. Just make sure that you also have Google Chrome installed on your computer. So that's the browser that we will be using for testing, which will become especially important in the React section in the end. So there you really will need Google Chrome because we will need some special developer tools there. Also, make sure that you really downloaded the starter files from the text lecture in this section. So I think that's probably right, the second lecture in the course, and there I gave you some instructions to download the starter files that you will also need in the next section. And with this, let's now finally move on to that next section and start writing some code.